Chaos has always been the natural state of existence. You don't have to look far to see it. War, poverty, uncertainty, and constant change. Human beings are thrown into the world with no clear instructions, no safety net, and no guarantee of stability. In that sense, every society begins in disorder, because chaos is the raw material of being. What separates one nation from another, or one person from another, is how they respond to that chaos. Do they surrender to despair and entropy, or do they rise up and build order? That question is not merely political, it is existential. For India, this struggle has been written into its very history, a land of immense contradictions, but also immense potential. To rise out of chaos requires courage, discipline, and vision, and that is precisely what India has demonstrated in its transformation. If you think about it psychologically, chaos is the unknown, and the unknown is terrifying. It is the darkness in which threats are hidden, but also the place where opportunities lie. India has faced this darkness repeatedly, whether through colonial exploitation, widespread poverty, or internal conflict. Yet, instead of being swallowed by that uncertainty, the country has slowly, painfully, and deliberately learned to navigate it. It's what every individual must do when they're confronted with the unpredictability of life. You don't start with clarity, you start with confusion, and through effort you carve out stability. Nations, like individuals, have to build that stability brick by brick. That is why India's rise is so remarkable. It mirrors the psychological process of confronting chaos and creating order. Consider how order is actually built. It's not a spontaneous miracle. It's the product of discipline across generations. Discipline is the voluntary acceptance of responsibility in the face of difficulty. In India's case, responsibility was taken up in education, in entrepreneurship, in governance, in cultural continuity. That doesn't mean perfection, because no system is perfect, but it means a decision to pursue order rather than decay. The same is true of personal life. You can let yourself fall into disorder, or you can discipline your habits, your thinking, your goals. When a nation embraces discipline collectively, its trajectory shifts. That is precisely why India is now perceived as formidable. It has chosen responsibility over despair. And responsibility is always more powerful than chaos. What's important to recognize is that chaos never truly disappears. It is always waiting at the edges, ready to flood back in. Poverty can return. Division can reappear. Weakness can be exploited. That's why order must be constantly maintained, guarded, and renewed. India's rise shows that a society doesn't banish chaos once and for all. It learns to contain it, to structure it, to convert it into strength. This lesson is just as applicable to you as an individual. Your life will never be free of chaos. But if you voluntarily confront it, you will discover the tools to create order within yourself. That's why India's growth isn't just a political event. It's a psychological example of what it means to take on responsibility for existence. You might think about India's transformation as a form of alchemy. The base material was chaos, colonial exploitation, fragmentation, and economic struggle. But through endurance, through the willingness to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term growth, that chaos has been transmuted into order. This is not unlike the human spirit, which transforms suffering into wisdom if it chooses the right path. The alchemical process requires vision, and vision requires belief that tomorrow can be better than today. That belief is not naive optimism, but a courageous stance against despair. India chose to believe in a future beyond its chaos, and that belief has reshaped reality itself. It's also worth noting that chaos often produces creativity. When structures are destroyed, when traditions are broken, something new has the chance to emerge. India's innovation in technology, in culture, in philosophy, is partly a result of centuries of wrestling with instability. Out of the crucible of chaos, creative solutions are born. This is why, psychologically, people who endure suffering often become stronger, wiser, and more innovative. The very pressure of chaos forces you to expand your capacity, to think differently, to adapt. India, as a collective entity, embodies this principle. It has turned the pressure of chaos into a furnace for innovation, and the world watches in both admiration and fear. Order is not about eliminating complexity, it's about structuring it so that it becomes livable. Think of a messy room. It's full of the same objects as a clean room, but without structure, it becomes unbearable. Nations operate the same way. India has not simplified reality, it has organized it. That is what people misunderstand when they see its rise. They imagine it's about wealth, or military, or technology. Those are outcomes, not causes. The cause is the decision to structure chaos into meaningful order, and to continually refine that structure. Individuals must learn the same lesson. Your life is not meant to be simple. It is meant to be ordered, so you can bear its weight without collapsing. The fear that arises in response to India's rise is deeply psychological. When an individual or a nation demonstrates that chaos can be mastered, it confronts others with their own inadequacy. If India can rise out of centuries of suffering and disorder, then what excuse do other nations or individuals have for not doing the same? That question unsettles people because it strips away the comfort of victimhood. It demands responsibility, and responsibility is frightening because it reveals how much potential we've wasted. That is why strength is often feared. It forces the weak to see their weakness and challenges them to confront it. India has become a mirror in which the world sees its own failures to confront chaos. From a symbolic perspective, chaos and order are the two eternal forces described in myth, religion, and psychology. Every culture has stories of heroes who venture into the unknown and bring back something valuable. India's current story is one of those archetypal journeys. The nation has ventured into the abyss of suffering, into the unknown of modernity, and has brought back knowledge, growth, and power. This is not just history, it's mythology playing out in real time, and mythology is not fantasy. It is the distilled wisdom of how human beings survive reality. When you see India's rise, you are not just watching geopolitics. You are witnessing the eternal story of chaos confronted and order established, a story every person must live in their own lives. Victimhood is one of the easiest positions a person or a nation can adopt. It offers the illusion of moral superiority while demanding nothing in return. If you are a victim, you can claim that the world owes you, and you can avoid the burden of personal responsibility. But this path is corrosive because resentment grows in the absence of action, and resentment eventually destroys both the individual and the collective. India had every reason to claim eternal victimhood. Centuries of colonization, exploitation, poverty, and humiliation at the global stage. Yet the remarkable fact is that it chose something far more difficult and far more noble: responsibility. That choice has made all the difference, and it's why India has emerged as a force the world must now reckon with. Responsibility begins where excuses end. It is the recognition that no matter how unfair the past may have been, the future depends on the choices you make today. Individuals learn this in their personal lives. You can spend years blaming your parents, your society, or your circumstances, but it won't change the reality that you are the one who must act. Nations face the same reality. India, instead of endlessly mourning its colonial wounds, decided to stand up and build. It began to see its suffering not as a permanent scar, but as fuel for growth. That is a psychological revolution, because it transforms weakness into strength. And the world fears those who refuse to stay weak. When you take responsibility, you sacrifice the false comfort of self Self-pity. Self-pity can feel satisfying because it places the blame outside yourself, but it also guarantees paralysis. Responsibility, on the other hand, is terrifying because it places the burden on your shoulders. Yet that is precisely why it transforms. India's willingness to carry that burden through economic reform, technological advancement, and cultural renewal illustrates this principle on a massive scale. Each decision was not perfect, but it was forward-looking. Responsibility does not mean perfection, it means direction. And direction matters infinitely more than standing still. Victimhood thrives on comparison. It says, look at what was done to me, look at how unfair life is, look at what others have taken. But that mindset ensures that you will forever measure yourself against someone else's actions rather than your own potential. Responsibility is different. It asks, what can I do with what I have, here and now? India asked that question, and the answer was growth, self-reliance, and global ambition. That transformation is not only material, it is spiritual. Because to stop playing the victim is to reclaim your dignity, and dignity is far more powerful than resentment. It cannot be taken away, only surrendered. Think of responsibility as the antidote to chaos. When you blame others, you give up control and chaos consumes you. But when you take responsibility, you become the architect of your own future. India demonstrated this by investing in its youth, in its industries, in its global presence. It refused to wait for external validation, and instead chose to act as if its destiny belonged to itself. This mirrors what every individual must do. Stop waiting for someone to rescue you, and begin rescuing yourself. Nations and individuals rise the moment they stop demanding salvation and start creating it. That is why responsibility is feared. It makes the powerless powerful. Resentment is the shadow of victimhood, and resentment is dangerous. It can corrupt the soul, turning suffering into bitterness instead of wisdom. A resentful person lashes out, destroys, and blames endlessly, but creates nothing. A resentful nation does the same. India, instead, transformed its suffering into determination. It did not ignore its past, it acknowledged it, but it refused to be defined by it. That is the psychological equivalent of transforming poison into medicine. Every human being has the same choice. You can turn your pain into resentment, or you can turn it into responsibility. Only one of those choices will lead you forward. Responsibility is frightening because it means failure belongs to you. If you accept that your life is your responsibility, then every mistake, every missed opportunity, every weakness is also yours. That truth is hard to bear, but paradoxically it is also liberating because it means your success is in your hands as well. India embodies this paradox. It took ownership of its failures, its corruption, its inefficiencies, and began reforming them. Progress was slow, but steady, because it was rooted in responsibility rather than blame. That same principle applies to individuals. Slow progress rooted in responsibility will always outlast fast progress rooted in resentment. Responsibility creates resilience. When you blame others, you are fragile, because the moment circumstances turn against you, you collapse. But when you take responsibility, you become adaptable, because you are prepared to carry the weight no matter what comes. India's resilience in the face of crises, economic, social, and political proves this point. It absorbed shocks, learned from them, and emerged stronger. That is the hallmark of responsibility. It makes you anti-fragile, capable of using even failure as fuel for growth. Victimhood leaves you brittle, waiting to break. Responsibility turns you into steel, forged through fire. The world fears responsibility because it is contagious. When one nation demonstrates what responsibility can achieve, others are forced to confront their own excuses. If India can rise from colonial subjugation to global prominence, what justification remains for nations that stagnate? If an individual can climb from poverty to success by taking responsibility, what excuse remains for those who refuse to try? Responsibility exposes the lie of helplessness, and people cling to helplessness because it shields them from effort. That's why responsibility, though empowering, is also unsettling. It removes every excuse you've carefully built around yourself. Responsibility is not only personal, it is collective. A family becomes strong when each member accepts responsibility for their role. A community thrives when individuals act responsibly toward one another. A nation becomes formidable when millions of individuals decide that their lives matter and that their actions count. India has shown what happens when responsibility is embraced on a civilizational scale. It becomes a force that cannot be ignored, one that transforms not only economics and politics, but also the very psychology of its people. And when that psychology shifts, fear is the natural response from those who still cling to victimhood. Every society is built upon the choices of individuals. It is a profound truth that often goes unnoticed because people are quick to credit governments, institutions, or abstract forces for the fate of a nation. But those structures are themselves made of individuals, each carrying out decisions, large or small, that compound into collective outcomes. If an individual is disciplined, responsible, and forward-looking, that discipline radiates outward. Families become stronger, communities more stable, and nations more powerful. India's rise is the outcome of millions of such decisions across generations, where ordinary people chose education, innovation, and work over despair and resignation. What seems like a national miracle is, in fact, the multiplication of countless individual choices aimed at progress. It is tempting to believe that collective success can be imposed from above, through policies or leaders. And while leadership is essential, no leader can carry a nation if individuals refuse responsibility. A government cannot educate every mind without the individual's will to learn. It cannot innovate without the creativity of entrepreneurs. It cannot maintain order without the discipline of citizens. India's growing power reflects this reality. Its advancements in technology, medicine, and industry are not the achievements of an abstract state, but the direct results of individuals pursuing excellence. This is why Peterson insists on the primacy of the individual, because without strong individuals, collectives collapse. The strength of an individual is contagious. When one person takes control of their life, their family benefits. A parent who becomes responsible instills discipline in their children, who then carry that strength forward. Families that embrace responsibility form communities that are resilient and trustworthy. Multiply that across millions, and you have a nation that begins to stand tall. India's transformation illustrates this ripple effect. It is not simply the product of elite decisions, but the momentum of countless individuals rising from poverty, pursuing education, building businesses, and striving for something better. Each act may seem small in isolation, but together they form the backbone of national strength. The reverse is equally true. If individuals collapse into chaos, the family unit disintegrates, and with it, the foundation of society. A nation is only as strong as its families, and families are only as strong as the individuals who compose them. This is why corruption, laziness, and despair are not merely personal flaws, but collective dangers. They ripple outward in destructive ways. India's progress required individuals to resist these temptations, however imperfectly, and to carry responsibility instead. That collective embrace of responsibility is what shifted the trajectory of the entire nation. A country's power is nothing but the reflection of the moral and psychological state of its people. Psychologically, people underestimate the impact of their own actions because they seem small compared to the scale of society. You might think, What difference does my discipline make to the fate of millions? But this is a flawed perspective. Collective outcomes are the aggregate of individual choices. If millions choose irresponsibility, collapse follows. If millions choose responsibility, growth becomes inevitable. India's story demonstrates this truth. When its people began valuing education, entrepreneurship, and self-reliance, the nation surged forward. The same principle applies to you personally. If you underestimate your importance, you weaken the whole. If you strengthen yourself, you strengthen everything you are connected to. It is also worth considering that greatness in a nation doesn't arise from the extraordinary alone. Of course, geniuses and visionaries matter, but their impact is magnified only when the average person is strong enough to support their vision. A single innovator cannot build an industry without the cooperation of thousands of skilled workers. A leader cannot govern well without responsible citizens. India's advancements in science, technology, and governance exist because millions of individuals prepared themselves to contribute, whether through small businesses, labor, or intellectual pursuit. That collective strength forms the soil in which extraordinary achievements can flourish. When you look at India's rise, it is tempting to focus on the spectacular outcomes: space exploration, military strength, or economic growth. But these are symptoms, not causes. The cause is the countless ordinary lives lived with increasing responsibility and determination. This mirrors the way life itself works. Stability and growth are not created by rare moments of brilliance, but by the daily commitment to order, discipline, and effort. Individuals who clean their room, structure their days, pursue knowledge, and act responsibly lay the foundation for nations that thrive. The extraordinary is built on the ordinary, multiplied to the level of the collective. This truth should be both empowering and unsettling. Empowering because it means that no individual is insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Every action you take, every responsibility you accept, contributes to the strength of the collective. Unsettling because it removes excuses. If your life is in disarray, it does not only affect you, it weakens your family, your community, and by extension, your nation. That is the heavy burden of responsibility, but also its immense dignity. India's transformation reveals the power of this burden shouldered collectively. It shows what happens when individuals recognize that their choices ripple outward into the fate of millions. The foundation of collective power is not material wealth, military force, or political maneuvering. Those are consequences, not origins. The foundation is psychological. The individual's decision to embrace responsibility rather than chaos. When millions of people decide that their lives matter and act accordingly, nations rise. When millions refuse, nations fall. India's rise is evidence of this eternal truth. It is not a miracle, nor is it merely economic strategy. It is the visible outcome of millions of invisible decisions made by individuals. And that same principle applies to every human being, everywhere, who dares to take responsibility for their life. A nation without a moral foundation cannot endure, no matter how wealthy or militarily powerful it becomes. History is littered with examples of empires that collapsed not from external enemies, but from internal decay. Rome, for instance, did not fall solely because of invasion, but because it lost its internal coherence, its guiding values. What gives a civilization strength is its ability to uphold a moral order that outlasts immediate challenges. India is formidable today not just because of its growing economy or technology, but because it carries a moral and cultural backbone that stretches across thousands of years. This continuity is rare, and it provides a depth of resilience that other nations lack. The world senses this, even if it cannot fully articulate it. Culture is not a decoration. It is a survival mechanism. People underestimate the role of stories, traditions, and values, imagining them as luxuries. But in reality, culture provides the rules by which chaos is transformed into order. It teaches people how to behave, how to endure suffering, how to cooperate, and how to aim towards something higher. India's cultural heritage, its philosophies, its spiritual traditions, its literature offers precisely this framework. It has allowed generations to endure immense hardship without collapsing into nihilism. A civilization that maintains meaning in the face of suffering becomes nearly indestructible. That is why India's rise strikes fear. It is not rooted only in power, but in meaning. When you strip away culture, you strip away identity, and when identity is lost, collapse is inevitable. This is why nations that pursue only material wealth often crumble. They have no unifying story, no moral compass to sustain them in times of crisis. India's story is ancient, and it binds its people with a shared sense of destiny. This is not to say it is uniform. India is extraordinarily diverse, but its diversity is structured within an overarching cultural continuity. That continuity provides the psychological glue that prevents fragmentation. Individuals, too, require such continuity. Without values, without guiding principles, life disintegrates into chaos. With them, it becomes bearable even in the face of immense suffering. The deepest fear other nations feel toward India's rise is the recognition that material power without cultural depth is fragile. Many modern societies are prosperous but hollow, built on consumption and distraction rather than meaning. India, by contrast, carries with it philosophies that have wrestled with existence for millennia. Its wisdom traditions ask questions about suffering, duty, and transcendence that modern societies often avoid. This depth gives India a kind of moral gravity. Nations built only on material success know, consciously or not, that they lack such grounding. And so they fear the strength of a nation that wields both modern power and ancient wisdom. Morality is not a constraint but a guide. It is what channels human potential into constructive pathways rather than destructive ones. A culture that abandons morality does not liberate itself. It enslaves itself to chaos. India's cultural framework, rooted in duty, family, and spiritual pursuit, directs individuals toward responsibility. That direction, repeated across millions, creates stability. The same principle applies to your own life. Without values, you drift, and drifting leads to despair. With values, you orient yourself, even in chaos. India's survival and rise across centuries demonstrate the sustaining power of values. That is not coincidence, it is necessity. It is easy to underestimate how fragile civilizations are when morality erodes. Wealth can vanish in a decade, military advantage in a year, but cultural collapse can happen overnight. Look at societies consumed by corruption, cynicism, and nihilism. They dissolve from the inside out. India's strength lies in its refusal to abandon its roots even while embracing modernity. That paradox, ancient yet modern, is what makes it so formidable. It does not lose itself in the pursuit of progress. Instead, it carries its cultural spine into the future. This balance is rare, and it is precisely why its rise feels unsettling to others. Culture also provides identity in the face of globalization. In a world where homogenization threatens to erase differences, India asserts itself with pride in its traditions. This assertion is not regressive, it is protective. Without identity, people become disoriented, and disorientation breeds weakness. India's preservation of identity ensures that modernization does not dissolve it into meaninglessness. This is the rehearsed SSSEMNETENCES individuals must learn. Values that sustain them. Progress without roots is collapse in disguise. Progress with roots is growth that can endure. India demonstrates the latter, and that is why it commands attention. The moral and cultural backbone of India is not just a shield. It is a weapon. A weapon in the sense that it offers strength others cannot easily counter. Economic and military competition can be matched with effort, but a moral and cultural depth forged over millennia cannot be replicated by will alone. It is a form of capital that cannot be bought, only inherited and lived. That inheritance provides confidence and stability. A person with strong values cannot be easily broken. A nation with strong culture cannot be easily subdued. India's power terrifies not only because it grows, but because it grows while carrying a foundation that is immovable. What makes culture so vital is that it gives individuals a story larger than themselves. A life without a larger story collapses into selfishness and despair. A nation without a larger story collapses into division and weakness. India offers its people a vast, unbroken story, one that transcends individuals and generations. That story ties the present to the past and points toward the future. It creates meaning, and meaning gives people strength to endure suffering without giving up. This is the essence of psychological resilience, to see your struggle as part of something larger, not just as pointless pain. India's culture supplies that resilience. From the perspective of psychology, values and traditions function like the spine in a human body. Without a spine, the body cannot stand, cannot move, cannot bear weight. Without values, neither can a nation. India has preserved its spine despite centuries of pressure, invasion, and exploitation. That endurance reveals a strength far deeper than surface-level power. It reveals the capacity to carry suffering without disintegrating. Individuals must do the same. You cannot avoid suffering, but you can stand upright if you have a spine, if you have values. That is the lesson India teaches the world. Strength comes not from avoiding chaos, but from carrying it with meaning.